We all know that the Christian fundamentalist thinks that the world and everything in it was created in 6 days. And they will state this is confirmed by the first chapter in Genesis. But the question is, if you go back to the Hebrew text, is that really what Genesis says? Stay with me as we disprove the fundamentalist with reason and reality once again. About 6 months ago, I was given a link by someone who said I really needed to watch this episode on YouTube. It was a debate between a former high school science teacher named Kent Hovind, who would no longer teach evolutionary science in the public schools, in favor of his stance of creationism. His opponents were 3 college professors, and Kent Hovind was given the opening in the debate. And the first thing out of his mouth was that he knew creationism to be truth because the Bible said so. A debate that was supposed to be on facts and evidence, and his first fallback was the Bible, because that's what the creationists do. Any theory they come up with, whether it has scientific validity or not, they conclude is true if it matches the Bible. So he states that we know the world was created in 6 days because Genesis told us so. And it turns out Dr. Kent Hovind delivered an untruth in his very first lines of the debate. Because if you go back to the actual Hebrew text, which is as far back as we can go, that word for day in the first chapter of Genesis, yes, it can mean 24 hours, and it can also mean a much longer period of time, depending on its context. So once again, the very first thing that the Christian fundamentalist said was absolutely incorrect. And I'm sure these 3 professors would have called him on it if they were historians instead of scientists. Now, many of you already know this to be true, but a little later in the video, I'm going to get into the why does the fundamentalist continue to dig his heels in and keep telling us that the Hebrew word for day literally means a 24-hour period. And let's look at this Hebrew word. The word for day in Hebrew is yom. It can mean a day, it can mean a year, it can mean a long period of time. Obviously, this word was meant to be used as a long period of time, because to believe everything was created in 6 days is absolutely absurd. If you believe this, that's the equivalent of believing that the earth is flat. No, I have no respect for this belief system. It's absolutely ridiculous. Now, I have in my sources an article from, once again, the Institute of Creation Research, which is fundamentalist based. Their contention is that the word day in the first chapter of Genesis means day because obviously when the word was used in other parts of the Bible, as with Moses, in context you can see that it meant day. This is nothing more than another example of the Christian fundamentalist using the tactic of, it must be so, because we say it so. And what's interesting here is they're not bright enough to realize that the Old Testament, it wasn't written by one person. It's a collection of stories written by various people in different time periods. So you really can't use that argument of day means this in one chapter, so it must mean this in another chapter, which was most likely written by someone else. The idea that Dr. Kent Hovind comes out onto a debate with 3 college professors and opens with it must be true because the Bible said so, as if that makes it absolute fact, just completely shows once again how ignorant the Christian fundamentalist actually is. Because not just one branch of science, but all the branches completely, conclusively, and repeatedly prove you wrong. But what is perplexing here is why does a Christian fundamentalist hang on to this? For instance, if I was an evangelist and I believed the Bible to be the literal word of God, and I found out that the word for day means sequence of time, this would not be a threat to me any more than the facts that we have about evolution, and they are facts, would be a threat to the belief in the Creator. I'm not an atheist. If I believed in going to a church, I would probably be going to the synagogue. And there's a lot of scientists out there, evolutionists, who are devout Christians. Because coming to terms with the fact that God created the universe in 6 sequences of time is nothing more than a longer time period than saying that He created it in 6 24-hour days. This information wouldn't be a threat if you're a Christian, but it certainly is if you're a cult member. And as I said, that's the real point of this episode, because most of us skeptics were well aware that the word for day in Genesis didn't literally mean day, as in a 24-hour period. My real end point is, why is a Christian fundamentalist hanging on to this when they have an easy out? They can still believe in the infallibility of the Bible, at least in this Genesis chapter, and at the same time believe that the word for day did not mean 24-hour period. And it goes back to what I just said. The nature of their organization is not to exert the belief and celebration of God. The nature of their organization is to assume control over its members. Like any cult, any sort of deviation to their dogma represents a grave threat to them. Because in a fundamentalist church, you're not supposed to research and come to an understanding that perhaps the word day means sequence of time. You're supposed to believe your pastor and elders and then consequently shut up about your own thoughts. Because if the congregation started believing that the word day in the first chapter of Genesis didn't actually mean day, that might not be a threat for the Genesis chapter. But what if they go on to Isaiah and find out that the word for virgin in Hebrew doesn't actually mean virgin, it means young woman? Well, then you have church members starting to think for themselves, don't you? And we certainly don't want that in the fundamentalist chapel, do we? And this is why it doesn't matter how much concrete evidence you give to the fundamentalist, which reasonably and emphatically proves that their world belief is incorrect. They are never going to accept any deviations from their norm. Because if the members start questioning the veracity of the Bible, they may start questioning the mores of the church as well. They may start wondering why Kenneth Copeland, a man of God, is worth $300 million, who owns his own private jet. They may start believing that it is okay to live with your girlfriend before marriage. And if this sort of individualistic thought spreads, then the church elders lose control over their members. Kent Hovind showed what the fundamentalist mindset is with his opening remarks to the 3 college professors in the debate. And down the road, I'm going to do a whole episode on just that debate, as Kent Hovind didn't say one single thing that was truthful. Because Kent Hovind, like all evangelists and fundamentalists, cannot crack that door open to let a little bit of truth in the house. Because they know fully well, if that door of reality ever completely opens, they will lose the foundation of fundamentalism itself. Now, if you'd like to take a look at some much more entertaining fiction, check out my novel, The Second Fall, an offbeat apocalypse and my idea of what it would be like if Christ ever actually returned. Highly irreverent and sure to offend the fundamentalist. On Amazon, in the link in the video description as well as the banner. And I will see you next time as we once again use reason and reality to thrust that sword into the heart of ignorance.